Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys, or have little solo episodes like this one. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but an actor and a filmmaker who is deeply interested in sharing my own struggles and exploring the mental health of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hi everyone, welcome back. These episodes have been a little bit sporadic, and I want to acknowledge that, but I have 2 more episodes of the season after this one, and they're all lined up, and I'm very excited to be sharing them with you. And both this episode today, as well as the 2 episodes coming, are going to be about a subject matter that I have been alluding to for quite some time on this podcast, but haven't really discussed yet. And today is the day where we are going to peel back the curtain, and I'm actually going to talk about what has been going on, because it's been difficult for me to share about how my mental health has been going, because so much of it has been tied up in my physical health. And, that's something that I talked about early on in the first season, about how much all of these different factors affect our mental health, how it's not just necessarily something that happens. It's also your environment. It's also the balance in your brain, your brain chemistry. It's also who surrounds you and what surrounds you, as well as, if something happens to you. And this medical stuff that I was dealing with, I couldn't talk about it because it had to do, it not only affected me, but it also affected other people. And I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag and have someone find out about what was going on the podcast, because that is just not fair. Or have someone tell them, oh, did you hear what Deborah's been dealing with, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so today's the day. We're actually going to talk about all this. If you are watching this, you might see my dog Junie make a little guest appearance. Right now, she's currently gnawing on her collar on my lap, but I'm sure that she's going to pop her head in here. So that's a little plug for you to go and watch on YouTube, or check out clips on TikTok if you would like to see my little adorable dog be a part of this podcast. So let's get right to it. This may seem a little bit dramatic, but last fall, I had a miscarriage, and it almost killed me. Now, I know that might seem dramatic, and it's very, I was very lucky to be in California. I was very lucky to have an incredible emergency system and doctors and people in place in order to ensure that that was not the case. But the facts are that I ended up needing an emergency D&C, which is when they go in and take any part of the baby out of your uterus. Excuse me for the little science lessons here or whatever. Definitely not a doctor of any kind. So emergency D&C is when they go in and basically suction out the fetus or whatever part of the baby is in there. This is often reserved for, early on in your pregnancy, although not always. And it's basically a medically mandated abortion. Basically, you are having an abortion. Of course, the fetus was already not viable, but it's the same thing as if you were having an abortion. But through that experience, I lost so much blood that I almost needed a blood transfusion. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because, number one, that experience and me going through a lot of struggles with infertility and being told by doctors that I wasn't going to be able to get pregnant, and then getting pregnant and then having a miscarriage, and then having that miscarriage end up being dragged out over 3 months, which I will get into a little bit more. It was a really difficult situation, and it really impacted my mental health And it was sad that I couldn't share that with you all, but I have a wonderful partner, and he has two wonderful children, as well as, the children's mom. And we wanted to make sure that we were not sharing about the pregnancy or potential pregnancy and then the miscarriage until it was necessary. And now, I don't know if you've seen the news, but I am pregnant again. I am due in September, and I'm very excited about that. And that is going to lead to a bunch of more content around mental health and the industry and just a myriad of different things, parenting, feeling like you're losing yourself, your goals, like all of that kind of stuff. We're going to go deep into that. But it was not something that I felt like I could share for a long time, and so I didn't. I found out that the pregnancy wasn't viable in September of last year, and then I was prescribed medication in order to try and induce a miscarriage. Now, the theme of this episode is going to be, and this is something that lots of women talk about, it's something that I know is joked about online, but I'm 100% truthful when I say this, that if men dealt with the same symptoms and had the same issues when it came to pregnancy and childbirth as women, it would be funded in multitudes of ways. There's no way that women's health would be misunderstood and underfunded the way that it is if it was a man who was experiencing these things. And that was made so clear to me through my miscarriage experience. Once again, I'm so lucky that I live in California. I do know that had I not lived in California and I experienced what I did with my emergency room visit and my DNC, I don't know if I would have had the same care or if I would have survived that experience. Because there is countless stories that I read online of other women who experience very similar things to what I experienced. And when they went into the emergency room for their DNC, doctors weren't allowed to do it in whatever states for whatever specific reasons because it was considered an abortion. And that is hugely problematic because, again, I almost needed a blood transfusion. If there was any delay on what needed to be decided to do, I could have lost so much blood and potentially my life could have been in danger. So again, I found out in September that my pregnancy was not viable, and I was prescribed these pills to try and pass the pregnancy naturally. Very short version, they didn't work. They didn't work at all. And I ended up having really awful side effects from those pills, but they didn't actually do the job that they're supposed to do. About a month later, I had DNC scheduled, and I ended up actually having what I thought was my miscarriage while I was on a Zoom meeting. It was actually quite a laughable experience. This was early November at this point, and I have actually made a short about it. Me and my partner and some dear friends of mine have created this short. It's called Glitter Bomb, and it examines the absurdity of miscarriage and how I was so devoted to staying on this Zoom meeting, even through this experience, because as a woman, I felt like I needed to maintain my composure and continue on in this positive way. And it was a wonderful experience actually for me, because at that point I had already been in this, I had been expecting a miscarriage at that point for 6 weeks. And so I was like, oh great, it has happened. My body is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Wonderful. Then that was beginning of November. So they canceled the DNC. And then a month later is when I had that emergency DNC and I had to go to the emergency room. So that is the timeline of events there. The things that I want to share here and explore here is that through those 4 months of having the miscarriage, just like the amount of mental energy that it took for me to maintain positivity or just to like keep my head above water was immense. And so I want to remind everyone of a few things. Number one, obviously we never know what people are going through. But also number two, that we have these events in our lives that derail us. And that's okay. And we will still get through it and still come out on the other end with a different perspective and with a new focus and with some positive outcomes of that experience. It's ironic because, last fall when all of this was going down, I was really focused. I was like in my mindset of, I'm going to refocus on my career. I've got all these, I actually started a new project, a new producing project. I was talking to new reps. Like I had all of this momentum and all of this stuff that was going. And then I had this big medical thing that I felt like my life was being derailed by all this medical stuff. But I also knew that I had to take care of myself, and it was like a forced step back for myself, which is something that is very difficult for me to do. This experience was such a reminder that our body is forced to slow down sometimes, and that we will get through things and things will have a different perspective, and we'll all, work out in some capacity on the other side. That whole experience was, a little less than a year ago. And as I said before, I'm very excited and happy to now be carrying a pregnancy into its third trimester. So everything, knock wood, seems to be going really great at this point. But the emotional impact that that experience had on me and continues to have on me is profound. I want to share some facts about miscarriage because, a lot of people think that miscarriages don't happen very often. Women kind of know that that's not the case because we are forced to learn about that in some capacity. And I apologize if you hear squeaking because Junie is now playing with a toy on my lap. They say about 20% of women will have a miscarriage, and they actually suspect that the percentage is actually much higher because some women don't even realize that they're having a miscarriage because they never realized that they were pregnant, so they don't classify it as that. So they don't know the exact percentage, but it's 20% or potentially higher. Most of these miscarriages happen before the 20-week mark, and most of them happen before the 12-week mark, which is when women and society kind of tells people, like, don't tell people that you're pregnant before that 12-week mark. Like, get through the scary part and then have everyone celebrate with you, which I do understand the point of view on that. I do get that. However, that means that so many women and so many couples end up experiencing the pain of a miscarriage 100% on their own, or with the help of, maybe close friends and family. But women's health to me feels like a equally stigmatized topic of conversation, just like mental health is in general. I think it's so amazing that mental health is becoming such an important topic of conversation. But to me, I'm like, the next frontier is women's health, because obviously women are not only 50% of the population or more. I think there's more women than men, but women are literally what keeps our population going. And the fact that there is, as I was shown through my experiences, so much misinformation, such a lack of support from the medical community for women's health, it's appalling. I have never felt so much like a statistic and uncared for as I did through that whole experience. Thankfully, now I have a really incredible medical team behind me for my current pregnancy. But it was a really, really shitty experience. And to feel like I had to experience that by myself or with, my partner and the few people who knew, that was really hard. And I want to call bullshit on that. I want to say that women should not have to suffer alone. We should not have to suffer, but we certainly should not have to suffer alone. And not to get political here, but this is exactly why so many women are up in arms about what is happening right now with, different political figures who are claiming that they know better than women about what women should do with their bodies. Like I said earlier, I know that if I would have not been in California, my life potentially could have been in huge danger through that experience, and that is unacceptable. That should not be the case. I really hope anyone who's listening who has been on the fence or has felt like women's issues are not necessarily their issues, that you really think about that again, because like I said, at least 20% of women are going to experience a miscarriage in their life, or if they've had a pregnancy, and that means that they have the potential of their life being in danger, because pregnancy is a really, it's a difficult experience. Was talking with a friend the other day, and she was saying how she came to terms early on in her pregnancy. She's got a really wonderful daughter now who's about 17 months. But she was telling me about how early on in her pregnancy, she came to terms with the fact that she might die during pregnancy, during childbirth. And that blew my mind. I had never thought about that before. I mean, of course, I've thought about it, but I hadn't felt like I personally, as an American living in California, needed to come to terms, and she does as well, coming to terms with the fact that I might lose my life giving birth because of the society that we currently live in. So when you're voting for people, please just think about that, and think about the fact that, like, women are not crying wolf here. There's huge problems with women's health and the lack of support for women. And I really hope that me sharing my story will expose the fact that so many people that you probably know are also having a similar experience, but they are hiding it, or it's just something that they are not sharing, which I completely understand. I wanted to share a few quotes from the World Health Organization. There is an article that I'm going to link in the show notes about mental health and miscarriages. And some of these stories are so important because I think that it kind of encapsulates everything that I am saying. For example, we have a quote from a pharmacist in Nigeria, and she says, "Coping with my miscarriage was traumatic. The medical staff contributed a lot to my grief, despite the fact that I am a doctor too. The other issue is the cultural attitude. In most traditional African cultures, people think you can lose a baby because of a curse or witchcraft. Here, child loss is surrounded by stigma because some people believe there is something wrong with a woman who has had recurrent losses, that she may have been promiscuous, and so the loss is seen as a punishment from God." Now, even though that story is a woman from Nigeria, I feel that the experience and the commentary around miscarriage is very similar here and in all over the world. Here's another quote from someone in the UK. She says, "I've had 4 miscarriages. Each time it happens, a piece of you dies. The most traumatic was the first one. We were so excited about our new baby, but when we went in for the 12-week scan, I was told I had a missed miscarriage, which is also called a silent miscarriage, which meant the baby had died a long time ago, but my body hadn't showed any signs. I was devastated. I couldn't believe that they were just going to send me home with my dead baby inside me with no advice about what to do." That in itself is such a perfect example of how I feel like the medical community often treats this. And, let me say, like, I understand that everyone's experience is different, that women's bodies are different, that there's so much nuance when it comes to health in general. But I do feel that, especially around pregnancy and miscarriage and women's health, it seems like because of the lack of research, the lack of medical funding, there is so much more nuance and gray area because they just don't have the answers. They just don't have the answers because they haven't taken the time to research it. And that's problematic. Now, like, I don't want this episode to be a downer. It really was just an episode for me to kind of explain what has been going on for me and what are some of the challenges that I've experienced, as well as the positive outcome coming through all of this to the other end. And obviously some women don't have that, and I have a lot of empathy for women who aren't able to have a viable pregnancy like I have this second time. I feel very, very grateful. But I think the bigger thing that I wanted to emphasize was that through all of this, one of the things that really kept me sane and kept me pushing forward was my creativity and my art. I found that so much women are put in a box as far as like you are a vessel for another human. Like you are the vessel to create something else. And unfortunately, this rhetoric is continuing to grow in our climate, in our current political climate, which is abhorrent. And it's so damaging that we are told that our self-worth is based on whether or not we can have a child. And then if you have miscarriages or are unable to have a child, what is your self-worth tied to? How damaging that can be for it to be that like you aren't able to do the thing that your body was made to do. And I certainly felt that. I certainly felt like my body was betraying me and I wasn't able to do the one thing that I have been built to do as a woman. But having my creative projects, making Glitter Bomb, making this short film about my miscarriage, so much of that helped me come through this and realize that this is only a piece of my identity, that I am excited to become a mom, but that is not all that I am. And I know that my mental health journey as a parent is only just beginning, and there is going to be a lot to dive into. But for now, I am firmly clinging to the belief that being a mother is just a small part of me. And there's so many other aspects to myself. And that is as a creative, as an actor, as a writer, as a producer, as a friend, and as someone who just likes to bring happiness and joy and creativity to the world. That is what I like to do. And I will be doing that by having a child, but I will also continue to be doing that through my experience as an artist, which is never going to go away. So that being said, these next 2 episodes after this one are actually going to be interviews with people who are parents and are also in the industry, because I want to talk about straddling this experience as a parent and this experience being in the industry. And if you are not a parent, I still encourage you to listen, because I think that, you know, I've talked so much about how if you're in the industry, I feel like your mental health is exacerbated or like is heightened in such a strong way. I feel very similarly when it comes to parenting. For example, you know, parents or like women in particular, like, oh, you can only do this one thing. And I feel like very often as creatives, we get pinholed in specific things, and it's just like, this is your identity and this is what you have to stick to. And that is the way that it is for parents. A lot of times women, once they become parents, they are pigeonholed as that and only that. And I am going to be working really hard to push against that stereotype. And so if you are someone who is a creative or, whatever, in whatever industry or field or whatever, however and why ever you listen to this, I guarantee that there is going to be pieces from these next 2 episodes that is going to resonate with you, because I think right now we're all having such a heightened human experience. And I hope that hearing other people's stories will make you feel a little less alone, because that is what this podcast is all about. Thank you everyone for sticking with me on this episode. I know that it was a bit meandery, but I hope that me sharing this is helpful for you in some capacity, or at least is helpful in the fact that I am exposing a little bit more about myself to you all. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to share any feedback. I'm always open to questions and comments, and yeah, I'm here for everyone in this community, and I really appreciate you all. That's it for this week. Thank you again so much for listening to the More Than You See podcast. Please remember that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in 2 weeks.